first time? Well, a lot of you, that's great. Thank you for coming. Jazz at the Library is a jointly sponsored by the Fresno County Library and Jazz Fresno. Jazz Fresno is a nonprofit that supports jazz in the Valley through education and performance, and tonight is a perfect example of education and performance. We are also supported by the Woodward Park Friends of the Library as well. And there are refreshments. Well, actually, the cookies are gone. Sorry about that. Yes, and there are refreshments. There's merchandise, Jazz Fresno merchandise in the back. Typically, this Jazz at the Library takes place 9 times out of the year. We already have the dates for the fall. The first 3 Tuesdays, September, October, and November, and we don't have anything in December. So you can always go to our website, jazzfresno.org, to find out about Jazz at the Library. And if you want to get out and listen to some live music, we've got a really excellent jazz calendar there. If you're looking for some live music. It's one thing to say that we support jazz through education and performance. I just want to mention 2 things very quickly. One is we have 2 umbrella organizations. Jazz Fresno does Milestones, Jazz Youth Workshop, which brings young kids from the Valley in and allows them a chance to work with other students and to have a chance to learn to improvise. And this summer, and I'm talking about partially because I'm so inspired by it myself. This last week, Jim Page, who's the director and developer of that program, had the jazz camp, and so we had almost 100 students that came in, and he brought in 5 internationally, or at least nationally, probably internationally known musicians who were clinicians and who gave master classes and inspired the students there. So this is the kind of program one of the programs that's a part of Jazz Fresno. And another I want to mention very briefly is that last week also we had the Jazz Educators Workshop. So not only do we work with students, but we work with jazz educators. So since he's here, I'm going to mention Bill Reeve in the back, who really headed up that whole Jazz Educators Workshop. And so educators from the Valley who teach jazz came in and had a chance to have a whole day of workshops that will help them teach the youth. So good programs. And so if you have, at any time, some discretionary income that you want to throw our way, we'd be very glad to have you support our programs. Jazz at the Library has been very successful, and one of the reasons that it's successful is because people in the community are interested in learning about jazz and interested in hearing live music. And the second reason they've been so successful is we have wonderfully prepared presenters presenting different jazz topics. And also, this is a big thing, is we have the presenter does get an honorarium, but most of the time, the musicians that come in are musicians who donate their time to come in and play for you and to play for us. And what kind of musicians are we talking about? We're talking about somebody that's been teaching in the music department for 17 years, a band director at Bullard High School, retired, that taught there for many, many years. Our musicians who's played 35 years on the drums for Johnny Mathis, among others. So these musicians are really, really fabulous, and we're lucky to have them. So please, let's give them a hand. So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's presenter, Rick Shaw. Rick took his undergraduate degree at Cal State University, Sacramento, in the Bachelor of Music, and then he went to the very prestigious Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, where he got his master's in music and media and contemporary media. Then he came out to the West Coast and started working as a freelance basis, not only in Los Angeles, but in Orange County. He also went on the road and played for a 60s vocal group. Yes. I know who the Lettermen are, but most of you probably don't know who the Lettermen are. And also for Buddy Rich and Maynard Ferguson. Since 1987, Rick has been in the band for Johnny Mathis, so he's been continues playing with Johnny Mathis 30 years now. Also, there's a very important big band in Los Angeles, the Gordon Goodwin Big Fat Band, it's P-H-A-T band, with tremendous musicians. Rick played in that band for 12 years, including the album that won the Grammy called Life in a Bubble. Rick is an adjunct professor at Riverside Community College, where he teaches courses. He teaches bass and business and music. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rick Shaw.
First of all, thanks a lot for coming out tonight. Jazz is supported by smaller groups of people, and having a group like this is really important and vital for jazz to continue. And education for kids and all that, it was something I loved growing up, still do, but to be able to play an instrument, play music was really important. So thanks for your support and coming out to hear the band tonight. We're going to play this album for you, not the recording, we're going to play it live. These are transcriptions that I did of the album. I started when I was at Eastman wanting to transcribe this, because just before I arrived, they did a concert of Blues and the Abstract Truth, and I arrived a little bit late, but I played some of it. So it started getting in my system, I started listening to it. And a buddy of mine who was in the program at the time, also Bill Cunliffe, who's a fantastic jazz piano player, teaches at Cal State Fullerton, he's done an album called Blues and the Abstract Truth Take 2 that was rated highly by all the jazz critics. So tonight we're going to play some of this. We'll talk about Oliver Nelson, but first let me get a little bit longer chord here. There we go. First, let me acknowledge the guys who are playing tonight. Mark Prather, stand up. Steve Daly. Fred Bunker. And piano. Phil Zama, my compatriot on Johnny Mathis. And Rick Shaw. Oliver Nelson, born in St. Louis in 1932. One of the reasons well, let me just talk about his background some first. You can see he started learning to play piano when he was young and played instruments young. He began at 15 playing music on the road. Where were the child labor laws? Anyway, that's how guys learned back then. They just went out on the road and started playing. There wasn't necessarily an education system for them, so they went out and played. He went into the Marines in 1952, served over there, and he had an interesting turnaround in his life when he went to hear the Tokyo Philharmonic play Ravel and Hindemith. And you can see his quote, he said, "It was the first time I had heard really modern music. For back in St. Louis, I hadn't even known that Negroes were allowed to go to concerts. I realized everything didn't have to sound like Beethoven or Brahms. It was then that I decided to become a composer." He became quite a composer. And it's interesting, the guys and I were talking today about when we listen to Oliver Nelson's solos on the record, they sound composed in a way. You can tell he was a real thoughtful player. He wrote a book called Patterns for Saxophone, and it was different ideas that he took and put down on paper for other saxophone players to learn to use. He continued his music education by going to Washington University in St. Louis, and he studied with the eminent composer Elliott Carter. So this is where he got his classical background. And then he also played with Erskine Hawkins, Louis Bellson, Quincy Jones, and Duke Ellington. So he led, this was amazing, in 2 years, 6 small group albums. This is when they used to record a lot. 6 albums in 2 years. Who would even think of doing that? Years ago, I played with a drummer who played, some of you may remember, one of Herb Alpert's groups called the Baja Marimba Band. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like the Tijuana Brass. And he told me in 6 years the band was together, they did 18 albums.
Wow.
That was the day. Boy, I love that now. Now you do an album every 2 years or something if you're lucky. And from 59 to 75, he recorded 33 albums under his name alone. He arranged and appeared as a sideman on hundreds of other recordings. He moved to Los Angeles in 67 and started working in the studios, writing for television and movies. Some of his projects were Ironside, Night Gallery, Columbo, The $6 Million Man on Long Street. He also did film scores that you can see there, Death of a Gunfighter, Skullduggery. Some of these I don't even know. I remember, well, of course, Alfie. And Last Tango in Paris, the only reason I remember that, I think at the time it was rated X and I couldn't see it. During this time, he also arranged and produced albums for pop stars such as Nancy Williams, James Brown, The Temptations, and Diana Ross. Here's a partial list of some of his TV credits. $6 Million Man, 50 episodes. Ironside, that was Raymond Burr. He was the handicapped, he was in a wheelchair. He was a detective in a wheelchair.
Very nice.
Night Gallery, he did 7 episodes for. Night Gallery was Rod Serling's sequel to The Twilight Zone. And it had like 2 or 3 episodes and 2 or 3 little, it was like a serial, well, little small episodes within one, where Twilight Zone had like a half hour. I think, if I remember correctly, Night Gallery was an hour and they had 3 different little short pieces in it. Long Street, he was a blind detective. It's funny, you don't think about that, but I look at it now and I go, gosh, we try to accept all this stuff, and but they were doing it in Hollywood way back then, The Name of the Game, which I don't remember, and It Takes a Thief. So he's best known for Stolen Moments and some of the other things, but in Night Gallery he got to feature more of his classical side. And nowhere it mentions here is the Bartok influence more pronounced than his score for The Boy Who Predicted Earthquakes. This was an interesting episode. It starred Clint Howard, Ron Howard's younger brother. And in the character that Clint played he was always learning. And he was a student, real bright kid. He was always learning. And whenever he learned something new, all of a sudden visions that he had made sense to him. So he learned about earthquakes and he could predict earthquakes. One night, he has a television show. And one night the host says, "What's your prediction?" And he couldn't quite say it, but he finally said, "All I can tell you is that tomorrow everything is going to be right. The world's going to be back to where it was meant to be. Everyone's going to be happy." I'll tell you the conclusion in a second. But here, we'll listen to a little bit of The Boy Who Predicted Earthquakes. pretty adventurous music for a jazz composer, right? Sounds more like modern classical. At the end, though, he's using a pattern called a diminished scale that jazz musicians know and love, and he's the theremin-like instrument, the electronic instruments playing through that. So the conclusion is, the host finally asked the boy off camera, "What have you been studying recently?" He says, "I found out about a thing called a nova, that the sun explodes." He says, "Yeah," and he goes, "And that's what's going to happen tomorrow. The sun's going to explode." But that's the best way you can tell the public was everything's going to be great. Rod Serling, ladies and gentlemen. So he continuing now. While he's doing this in the 60s, he also has his own big band. He's doing other jazz recordings. He's doing tons of great things. But the biggest hit for him was the $6 Million Man. And in this, on the little clip I have here for you, you can hear the beginnings of classical music, but then it goes into his jazz thing with a contemporary rock beat at the time. Notice also when Steve Austin, the hero, arrives on the scene, remember he's bionic. They rebuilt him. He can look with his right eye and see 20 times what a normal person can see. His right arm's been rebuilt. His legs have been rebuilt so he can run 60 miles an hour. So you'll notice Steve Austin's character, when he arrives on the scene, he has sweat on the left side of his body, but not on the bionic side.
Cover your ears. Cover your ears.
You guys can have a seat because I got another little bit here. So I found this clip and I just transcribed that yesterday because I thought, this is great. It's a great introduction to Oliver Nelson. Oh, and the evil people that he fortunately ridded the earth of for us, they had a microwave machine. And that's why they had to cover their ears. Like, that makes sense. Your brain is getting boiled and you're covering your ears. And as if this is going to help cover your ears. You got to put your fingers. It's 1971. So that's what we believed back then. Yeah, so the scene begins with the classical influences, and then he arrives. That's the theme song to this show also that we played. And it's based on a minor blues, and that's what we're here about tonight, is blues and the abstract truth. So while writing for TV and movies, he continued playing jazz, like I said before, and but not to the extent that he had in his earlier career. Some people, it was interesting, I was talking to a sax player who was around at that time. He didn't work for Oliver Nelson per se, but he did a lot of album recording in that era. And he mentioned, just out of nowhere, he said, you know, a lot of composers back then died early, a lot of TV composers, because there was so much stress. The music is the last thing that goes on. So they've done all the edits, they've done all the stuff, you got all the dialogue replaced, done all the stuff. Now they put on the music. Oh, and it's 3 days before the episode airs. You know, usually they'll give them a week or 2 weeks maybe to compose stuff. Sometimes not that long. So it took its toll. Many people believe it took its toll on Oliver Nelson also, and he died at the age of 43 in 1975 from a heart attack. This is what we're going to play for you tonight. Stolen Moments, Cascades, Urinin, Butch and Butch, Keeney's Blues, Festive Minor, which is not one of his, but it helps feature some of the other guys playing, and Hoedown. So about the blues, it's a simple song form. It's only 12 bars long. It's the most popular song form in jazz. There are hundreds of tunes that were based on the blues. And even Steve Austin's theme that we just heard there, you may not have noticed it, but it is a blues. It's based on that same 12-bar song form, just done in minor and with a rock rhythm. He uses 3 main chords. Hey, I'm going to ask Craig to play some of them. Craig, for right now, just play triads. We'll do it in C. So the tonic chord, which is the 1 chord, the subdominant, which is the 4 chord, and then the 5 chord. And that's basically the only 3 chords that are in blues. They're different alterations, they're different things that can happen, but it's based on those 3 chords. Craig, would you play them the same 3 chords, but play them as 9 chords or 13 chords? That's how we're used to hearing them in jazz, with some of the upper extensions, not just the regular chord itself. Here's a list of some songs that you may know, that these aren't jazz tunes, these are just pop tunes. Rock Around the Clock, Shake, Rattle and Roll, Tutti Frutti, Ah Rudy. What'd I say? Wipeout by the Surfaris. Joe? There you go. There you go. You know, they were 16 when they recorded that. The Surfaris, 16 and 17. They were in high school, these kids. And they had the A side of the record. Back then, you had, for the 45, 2 sides. The A side, that was supposed to be hit, and the B side. Well, the B side was their hit, it was Wipeout. I Got You, Wooly Bully, the Batman theme. Da 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 da. Batman, that was a blues too. And it goes on. Here's an example of the blues done with the Count Basie Band, and this is a minor blues also. There are 2 types basically, major and minor. Doesn't matter. It's just the chord quality.
I left my baby standing in the back door crying. Yes, I left my baby
just use this as a quick example for you. I'm going to see if I can put it back to just part of it. So it's 12 bars long. So this is the introduction. Here starts the song. Here's the first bar.
I left my baby standing in the back door crying.
4. Now that's basically the 1 chord. Now this is the 4 chord for the 5th bar. 6.
Standing in the back
To the 1
door
chord. 7.
crying.
9th chord goes to the.
You got a
It's going to go to the 5 chord.
as long as I've got mine.
12. Now repeats the song.
Leave you, baby. Count the days I'm gone.
And that's what we're going to be playing for you tonight, blues. Except one of the tunes will be a little different version, but mostly blues. So Stolen Moments is the first song that we're going to play. It's the first one on the album. And it's a minor blues, just like what we heard here. The solos are the traditional 12-bar minor blues. The melody's 16 bars, but it stays true to the blues form, essentially. It goes to the 1 chord, the 4 chord, eventually to the 5 chord. The melody's played in harmony by the 4 horns. It's a tight voicing with dissonant intervals. And Craig, do you have your chart up there? Could you play the first chords? Now, I'm going to ask you to do something. Can you space it out a little bit more so it doesn't have the dissonant minor second in those chords? And I'm putting Craig on the spot. He's doing a great job of this. You see how much more that doesn't sound? It doesn't have the same tension in it, does it? As the first one. Play that one more time. Yeah, it's got that rub, and that's throughout this album. Is that rub? In fact, it influenced a lot of people, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on too. Oh, it's going to be here because I put it down at the bottom. Donald Fagen. Do people recognize the name Donald Fagen? He played in what band? Steely Dan. And it influenced their Asia album. They asked Tom Scott to write the horns similar to Blues and the Abstract Truth. But here's Donald Fagen doing it in 2 of his songs from the Nightfly, Ruby and Maxine.
I've got a girl and Ruby is her name. Ruby, Ruby, Ruby.
One, two, three, 4. All right, so I want to mention a little bit about the musicians that were on this album too. The first, well, obviously, Oliver Nelson. We've talked a lot about him. Bill Evans, piano player, great piano player, grew up in New Jersey playing, and he grew up playing just in dance bands. And they had these stock arrangements, which were very square, kind of corny arrangements. And he started figuring out, oh, I could play this, I could play that. And he and his brother Harry were both musicians. Harry played piano as well. There's a funny interview that happened years ago with Harry teaching, I forget where he taught, what college. It was down in, Southern Louisiana University. And Harry's asking Bill about, how did you get these voicings for these chords? How did you get such rich sounds? And Bill says back to his brother, I don't want to take the joy, the thrill of discovery away from you. You have to find out for yourself. And you can just see Bill ripping his hair out. It's like, what did you just tell me? You're my brother, damn it. Anyway, so he had classical piano lessons and played his dance hall gigs and everything. He recorded more than 50 albums as a leader. He also played a lot with Cannonball Adderley, Tony Bennett, Toots Thielman, who was a great harmonica player, Jim Hall, and Stan Getz. He received 5 Grammys and a Lifetime Achievement Award. One of the most lyrical figures in modern jazz. He changed piano playing a lot, and one of the interesting things, oh good, I'm coming up to it, so I won't give it away yet. But Bill had a horrible drug problem that followed him throughout his career, and he finally passed away of multiple ailments, but a lot drug-related, in 1980. So he had a lot of influences on generations of jazz musicians. He played for 8 months with Miles Davis, and shortly after that, Miles recorded his classic album, Kind of Blue. Now the interesting thing is that Miles is given credit for every song, but it was Bill Evans. It wasn't Miles. Miles took the credit, but Bill Evans composed almost all the material for the album. So listen here to Bill's recording of Peace, Peace, and then Miles' flamenco sketches. on Miles. It's a little bit the same, doesn't it? The only difference of the two songs is that Flamingo Sketches has some chord changes, and Peace Peace is really just the C chord over and over. But it was Bill Evans' influence that Miles wanted on the Kind of Blue album. And so Bill Evans plays on all the tracks except for one, Freddie Freeloader, not Freddie the Freeloader, Freddie Freeloader. And it was the blues, and he had Wynton Kelly play on that. Okay, so now we're going to play for you a tune called Cascades. It's a traditional song form again we talked about blues, but then there's also a lot of Broadway music that has an A section, it repeats that section, then goes to a bridge, and it comes back to the A section. They call it AABA. So for this, I miswrote it. I wrote 12-bar minor blues for the A section. It's really a 16-bar blues, then an 8-bar B section. And what was interesting about this, Craig, will you play that little lick there? So the notes that I circled in red, will you play those, Craig? So it's a C minor chord. This was an exercise. This piece came out of an exercise that Oliver Nelson wrote for himself. And what he was trying to do was hit on the downbeat, on long beats 1, 3, 1, 3, a chord tone. And the other notes are material that approaches that chord tone. So we're going to play for you Cascades, featuring and Joe Lozama open up front. guys, before we leave that one, could we play the section at letter J for them? I just wanted to show you again, this is Oliver Nelson's writing where he just made sure he had those real tight voices. So let's play letter J. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, also, let's do the background that happens. Is it letter C, letter B? Is that where you guys enter, letter B?
Yes.
So without the solo, just the background, letter B. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see the elements of the same dissonance that he was trying to put in, and then he does it with all 4 horns later. Great, thanks guys. We'll move on and we'll talk about another musician that was also on this album. Give another hand to Joshua. That's Eric Dolphy was the alto player on the album, and he grew up in Los Angeles. His parents were from Panama, which I didn't know until I started researching this. He picked up clarinet by age of 6, and less than a month he was playing in the school's orchestra. He heard Fats Waller, Duke Ellington, Coleman Hawkins, and led him to jazz. He started to play that in high school. His father built Eric a studio in the backyard for all his friends who come over and jam. One of those friends was Charles Mingus, who also grew up in Los Angeles. And when Charles had already moved to New York, and Eric followed later and joined Mingus's band. Also, John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy became good friends. They exchanged ideas with each other, and Eric Dolphy became a member of Mingus or of Coltrane's band. It's the same thing, but a different picture of Eric, so that's good. He died accidentally in Berlin in 1964. The details of the death are still disputed, but basically they feel it was an undiagnosed diabetic condition. He went into a diabetic coma. And apparently they thought, oh, he's a musician, he's using drugs, it's drug related. He was a diabetic coma. He was posthumously inducted into Downbeat Hall of Fame. John Coltrane played tribute saying, whatever I'd say would be an understatement. I can only say my life was made much better by knowing him. He was one of the greatest people I've ever known as a man, a friend, and a musician. So I wanted to play for you an excerpt. He played alto sax, he played flute, but he played great jazz bass clarinet. Who does that? But this is a Duke Ellington song called Come Sunday, and it's with bassist Richard Davis bowing the melody and Eric improvising over on top of that. Sections. So guys, let's play this one.